Hello, and welcome to another installment of Privacy Conversations, our series where we speak with experts from various fields about the challenges at the intersection of technology and policy. Thank you all so much for joining us. Today, I'm really excited. We're going to talk about the ways in which advances in technology and AI are requiring companies to evaluate their governance programs and update their compliance protocols. I can't think of two better guests to have for this conversation. I have Bojana Belamy, who is the president of CIPL, the Center for Information Policy Leadership, and Susan Cooper, Meta's own Global Data Protection Officer. I'm going to give a little intro of both of them. Bojana was our first guest on Privacy Conversations. She has more than 25 years of experience in privacy and cybersecurity law, policy, and compliance. And she leads one of the foremost global privacy and data policy think tanks. Her expertise and leadership have earned her numerous accolades and industry awards. And she's been recognized by Politico as one of the top Tech 28 people shaping digital policy in Europe and beyond. Susan Cooper, our other guest, has also been in the privacy space for over 2 decades. Before joining Meta, Susan worked at the Federal Trade Commission. And while at Meta, Susan has held various senior privacy roles before becoming our global DPO several years ago. Susan also leads our regulatory readiness and our privacy and security compliance teams at Meta. She's got deep expertise in privacy compliance and regulatory strategy, and she ensures that Meta's products meet the highest standards of data protection worldwide. Suffice to say, there's so much to learn from Bojana and Susan about the ever-changing risk management and compliance environment. So welcome to Privacy Conversations. It's a privilege to have all of you here, and let's jump right in. So I'm going to start, Bojana, with you, and I want us to set the scene together, but I really need your help. So I'm going to go back a little bit. As this audience knows, 2018, 7 years ago, the EU's GDPR came into force. And it created one of the first, most comprehensive data protection regulatory frameworks. It marked a sea change for companies that manage consumer data. And the GDPR's accountability principles, they've been followed by regulators around the world. Countries like Brazil, South Korea, South Africa, India, many US states have adopted privacy frameworks inspired by GDPR. And there's also been a bunch of cross-industry regulations on youth and privacy inspired by GDPR. And we see aspects of GDPR's accountability principles in the landmark agreement Meta reached with the US Federal Trade Commission in 2019. Everyone seems to focus on the fine we paid with the FTC settlement, but the longer-term impact that I have seen have been the investments we've made in a privacy program designed to assess and mitigate privacy risks. So since 2019, there's been an incredible amount of regulatory activity. And this patchwork of regulations around the world demanded that Meta build a truly cohesive and robust compliance program. And our program centralizes accountability and ensures consistency across all of our products. All told, Meta has spent more than $8 billion in teams and technology over the past 6 years. And Susan's going to attest to how many important programs we've built in compliance processes. But before we get to Susan and we talk about Meta's efforts, Bojana, now I want to get to you. And I want you to talk to us about the global data and privacy regulatory environment today and what you're seeing in terms of how companies are managing and approaching risk management today.
Erin, great to be with you again. And of course, 5 years ago, when we did this conversation first time, we talked about then nascent accountability program of Meta, then Facebook. So it's good to be back and good to see the progress and the evolution. I mean, I think you make an important point, which is, and let me sort of say that accountability is not a static concept. Accountability means translating legal policy, external and internal standards and requirements into operational practices. And that has to keep evolving all the time as the companies organizations that implement accountability change themselves, right? But in addition, we witnessed the digital tsunami of 2020s, I call it, right? It's not a particular year, but it's almost this last 4 years, starting with Europe, but also spreading elsewhere, where regulators and policymakers are sort of starting to understand or believe that we need to regulate how technology is developed, how technology and data are used, how data can be opened to enable better innovation. There are new things like safety and security. And so we've had this sort of proliferation of what I call D files and D acts, certainly in Europe, where you see the regulation of data protection, but then, of course, regulation of AI, regulation of Digital Markets Act, competition, and fair access to data, opening of data for competition purposes. You see regulation of online safety here in Europe in particular, so content regulation, and with that come, of course, the best interest of the child, children's privacy, children's safety. Then, of course, we have got the rise in cybersecurity requirements because data security is an incredibly important aspect of all of this. So it's really complex digital regulatory space at the moment. And so the question becomes, and not to mention AI, right, where in fact we are seeing companies already trying to develop responsible AI and robust and secure and safe AI just as a matter of business need rather than the law. And I think that's an important one as well. How do you navigate not just one area of digital regulation and discipline, but these multiple areas, which are all in parallel, siloed, but they overlap, and sometimes they conflict, right? So I think the moment has come that companies simply cannot look at this anymore in silos, and they have to think about what I call, or we at CIPL call, integrated compliance, integrated accountability, that looks at the spectrum of all these laws together. And I'm hearing the regulators want to see that as well. And we've been kind of challenged by regulators who are saying, we want to see the companies thinking across these disciplines, the impact on people, individuals, society of the products that they're creating or technologies they're putting on the market, of the data that they're using, but also that impact to be positive impact, right? So the risk assessment, the risk management has become more complex, right? We can't just think what is the risk, but we have to think what are the benefits that we are trying to achieve in delivering this for the society or for the organization or, whoever, right? There could be multiple stakeholders. And I think here is the opportunity for all of us to double down on accountability, to actually show that bottom-up organizations can implement policies, procedures, tools, rules, controls that are appropriate to the risk, that are appropriate and take into account the benefits, that build that digital trust, but enable us all to also reap the opportunities of digital and to integrate these different areas of accountabilities. Because, we are at the cusp of yet another technology revolution. We're going to see much more. And by being accountable and having these tools in place, and I call it charter, roadmap, right? You are able as a company to amortize, to adapt to what's coming. You are able to actually take your people on this journey of transformation, take your consumers, customers, no matter what business you are in.
Thank you, Bojana. Yes. And so, Susan, I want to turn to you on this idea of doubling down on accountability and how we have met this moment that Bojana lays out so well. We need to be solving for privacy and safety and security and trust. People and regulators, they want us solutions for in all of these areas. And we can't approach risk management in a siloed way. So, Susan, what has Meta done to centralize accountability in such a decentralized regulatory environment?
Thanks, Erin. And you're exactly right in that we, of course, have invested significantly in our privacy program. You and I have witnessed that firsthand. We, of course, had a privacy program prior to 2018, but following GDPR and our 2019 FTC order, we really took that program down to the studs and completely rebuilt it. We invested in people, process, and technology to ensure that every aspect of the program was rooted in a strong foundation. Like what we always say here is the laws and the lawmakers are not aware of our organizational charts, right, and structures. And so you will see one law contain requirements that apply across each of those domains. And so we realized a few years ago that what we needed to do was create a centralized company-wide process that's designed to understand and respond to all of these new regs across domains, across the requirements. So this type of process, it allows us to address gaps not only in our existing products, but also establish requirements for new products so that we can remain compliant over time. So of course, these new laws, they have direct product implications. We have deletion timelines or consent requirements, for example. But as Bojana mentioned, so many of these laws now contain accountability-related requirements. So we have to do things like risk assessments, documentation, compliance oversight, and reporting. But what we did realize at a certain point is that what we had built for our privacy program, risk assessments, policy development, control testing, program governance, that works not just for privacy, but also for content, for youth, for AI, et cetera. So it really just felt natural for us to expand and evolve our program to become not just a privacy program, but a product risk program. And building that centralized risk management program where all new requirements are ingested in one place, it ensures we understand the total landscape of what's required of us. We can identify those conflicts and those overlaps that Bojana was mentioning, and we can work with teams around the company to ensure a strong response. It also allows us to have better oversight across the total picture of risks to our products. And of course, it also means we can work more efficiently. And it has the benefit of giving our product teams one place that they can come to centrally assess and manage risk. And that ultimately allows them to feel more confident that they're launching compliant products. And it gives assurance to our users that that our products that they're using have been through this process.
And we can't overburden our business teams with yet another set of legal requirements, yet another review, yet another online questionnaire to fill out. So, that's really why this accountability is so important, because it enables you to translate the requirements to what people actually do, to code privacy by design, safety by design, security, trust by design. I think that's what it is, right? Ultimately. And so it becomes embedded in what people do. So it's really important that companies who are not doing this, they absolutely must have this holistic point of view on digital regulation, compliance, or really what is good to do.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting about what you said, and is Susan's team sits within our product org. And I think this is unique and really interesting. She sits along, and I want Susan to talk about this, but she sits along engineers and product managers. The product is the process, and that accountability process and risk review. And you mentioned embedding in code, and I do, Susan, if you could take a minute to talk about technology and how we are using technology as part of our program. And so, Susan, if you talk about that a little bit, and then Bojana, I have a question for you after that.
Of course. And I think, Erin, what you said, it's really what is part of the magic of our program. When you combine compliance specialists with engineers and product managers in a tech company, you can use the exact same innovative technology that's built our products to build a world-class compliance program. And so when we first rebuilt our program, we designed and implemented a lot of those processes manually. And I think it's really helpful to use a house building analogy. We really did rebuild the house from the ground up. We had to get our house in order to meet our privacy obligations. And then as new regs came up in different areas, we realized we needed a bigger house. So we had to remodel, right? And this is when we started to realize that not only do we need a bigger home, but we also needed a smarter home, right? So, of course, you've got manual light switches, but people forget to turn off the light switch when they leave the room. So you can have the smart lights that turn off when you leave in case you forget to turn off the switches, right? And so you need the manual process and you need the technology to back that up. In 2018, GDPR took effect. It created a whole new set of requirements, and we had to really reckon with those from scratch, right? But then as new laws came up, new requirements came out, a lot of them mirrored GDPR-like requirements. So we'd already wrestled them with them. We'd already sort of decided what the right thing to do was in response to that type of requirement. So once you've built a solution to a requirement, whether it's a risk framework, a policy, you realize you don't have to start from square one each time. And so we built tools, including what we call privacy-aware infrastructure. And the idea is that you can embed privacy requirements into our code, and you can allow the technology to help us consistently identify risks in a standard way. And then you build the solution into the code for the product teams to use. So it makes it a lot easier for them to mitigate those risks in a tested and true way. So just to get even more concrete, data deletion and retention requirements, right? They vary by jurisdiction, but automation can make those requirements apply uniformly across our features. You don't need layers and layers of people and manual reviews to make sure that a new feature complies with a deletion requirement or a retention policy. Those are informed by regulatory requirements. They're very specific. And you can build the code so that the engineer can take the code and put it in their product. And you know that it is consistent, it's going to operate as intended, and you test that code rather than having 17 different engineers design their own code to do exactly the same thing where there's more risk for potentially human error.
Yeah, and I've seen this evolution since I've been at the company, this privacy-aware infrastructure. When we started building this and building the rules into the code, it was just a game changer. And Bojana, I want to just ask you, are other companies automating in this way? I mean, Susan discussed how Meta's been doing it, and I've seen firsthand how we've done it. What are other companies doing in this space?
Right. I know, absolutely. This is a big trend at the moment, industrializing accountability, automating accountability. Early on, we've seen many companies automate, even the actual risk assessment intake questionnaire, whether your product or project will be considered low, high, medium risk based on what you answer, then you are scored and you would go into yes, you have to talk to privacy officer, or you have to talk to legal as well, or you can just go ahead and do this subject to the following things. I mean, honestly, if you ask 100 people on your team to do privacy impact assessment, they will not do it the same way. So you're going to have different outcomes. In some ways, by automating this, you're bringing that, as Susan says, rigor and repeatability of the process, and you're freeing your people to actually do perhaps more complex roles. We've seen a lot of privacy enhancing technologies also being deployed and built, from synthetic data to data anonymization to some more like federated learning, even as mitigations in project delivery, for example, and product delivery. We've seen a lot of data flow mapping and records of processing, because there is a requirement that you must have these records of processing. And can you imagine having people wasting that day mapping all the data flows? I mean, you really want to invest in technology to tell you where is your data, who has general access to that particular data and systems, are there any third parties touching it, are there international data flows as well, because this matters as well. So quite a lot of automation in the sort of data flows, data inventory side as well. I know this is expensive to do, but companies who do not automate can hardly actually expect full accountability, because I think that the possibility of error, of something not doing something right, forgetting what the rules are, no matter how much training you do, is huge. So automation really does help accountability be more effective.
Yeah, so it's clear. And I think both of you have talked about how clear it is that automation enables and empowers people to then take on more difficult questions, because they're able to create tools for the repeatable types of processes. And then people can actually take on the harder questions. And you mentioned AI, Bojana, and I want to go there now because everyone's using it, everyone's talking about it. But I want to know, in this space particularly, how is it going to make risk review, risk management, compliance work better? And so, Bojana, I'm going to start with you on this one, and then
I mean, look, AI is, of course, it's everywhere. So it's not surprising that we have to look into AI to help us automate all kinds of processes and workflows, including the compliance ones. And again, because honestly, if it can actually predict a disease and can diagnose breast cancer, it has to be able to do something around privacy compliance. I mean, right, are going to be able to actually help us, consumers, navigate the difficult area of, for example, transparency. They may be able to read privacy policies, notices, and alert us to what is new. In fact, one of the big privacy requirements, including the US now, of automated decision making, and the EU, is to be able to explain how a decision was made and to be able to contest that decision. Of course, not a decision whether I see advert for red shoes or my favorite movie, but this important, significant decision: will I be given credit? Will I be hired? Will I be allowed to visit a country? Will I be given a particular treatment? I mean, all of that is going to be made by AI. These are the important decisions. Interestingly, in the health sector, we see the whole drug discovery and drug approval regulatory process has now been, and I was at this incredible event where the pharma companies and regulators talked about how AI is helping them do this as well. So companies are now predicting, based on everything they've seen, as to what kind of questions regulators will ask in terms of a drug approval. And they are preempting and giving those answers. And regulators, of course, based on tons and tons of data and history, are also able to ask difficult questions and probe further, and of course go through the process faster. And that's going to happen with privacy as well. And we want regulators to do that. Indeed, we should all be investing in these tools and in the companies who are making them, because it really will help everybody.
And so, Susan, how are we using it?
Our risk review process is arguably the heart of our product risk program. We have over 1,500 products that go through this process each month, right? So you can imagine a lot of the same issues are coming up repeatedly. And so, the idea that we can have people reason with an issue, 1, 2, 3, 4 times, and then the systems start to learn from that and then help teams more automatically identify risks and possible mitigations for those is really exciting to us, because it really does mean that we can move faster, be more consistent, ultimately protect people and their data across our platforms more easily. And the other example that I think is worth talking about is how we can use AI in the regulatory readiness space, right? And so, imagine a world where you can take AI and it can look at a new regulation that has just passed, and it can break down the requirements under a new law, help start to assess the gaps and do initial assessments that would have taken people weeks to do manually. And moving faster in this way is incredibly important when you consider some of the very short implementation timelines that regulators are putting in place for regs. I mean, we've seen cases where new laws take effect like the day that they're passed, right? That's like nearly impossible to reckon with. But with shorter and shorter timelines and more complex regulations, the ability to use AI to help us keep at pace is going to be very, very valuable. But it is worth just doubling down on the point that, of course, we still need people to oversee all of this, right? There's so many new novel requirements and risks that are going to need that initial treatment, right? But as we've talked about, it does allow us to take those people who previously had been spending their time doing a host of activities, many of which were very time-consuming, rote, and manual, and had a lot of room for error, and automate those things and have people oversee the automation to make sure that that is working as intended and effectively, and then focus the bulk of their time dealing with the really, really hard questions. And so, I'll just say that, if we're using AI for our most innovative products, leveraging it to innovate compliance feels not only natural, but really expected and essential.
LAM and other offerings out there to create training for data protection and safety and security and all of this in an integrated way, in an interesting way, with avatars.
And the idea that we sat it for a product and technology company, we put compliance in our product organization so that our team is comprised of people, including data analytics experts, right, and specialists there, data scientists, so that we can think about compliance in that way. How do we measure the effectiveness? And we are seeing regulators not just expect us to do the initial assessment before we launch the product, but then follow up after launch and demonstrate and evidence that the risks that we identified, the mitigations that we put in place, one, were effective and are doing what we expect them to do, but that they continue to be the right mitigations. Because once a product is out there in the market, then you learn, okay, maybe there's new risks that we hadn't originally considered. And so that life cycle for compliance is increasingly more important. And we do need to be really thinking innovatively about how we are measuring the effectiveness of the program and the work that we're doing as well.
So one more question, but just to sort of bring us full circle, we started out talking about the evolution of the regulatory environment, how dynamic it is today, the regulatory environment, how we're wanting to see all these disciplines addressed in one way through a centralized accountability program. Now how technology is also catching up with enabling us to build tools that allow us to meet the moment of this regulatory environment, and how AI is going to just enhance, I think, every company's, and I think actually democratize and make it more accessible, this technology revolution for accountability and compliance for all sized companies. So really exciting, really dynamic. One last question, just what are you excited about in the future? Where do you see it going?
You know, the role that you all play, we all play in this process, that we are bringing our companies, our people, a larger population, really making them more comfortable with this huge, more pivotal moment of kind of digital explosion or revolution that we are witnessing. So that's exciting to me. I think we have got a bigger role to play, and I'm really, really excited about what's coming next.
Yeah. Susan, how about you?
But one thing that's really exciting to me is the ability for AI to detect privacy issues and problems in advance of them happening, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we all know that is, companies can invest and do all the right things. Mistakes happen. And the idea that fewer mistakes can happen and we can detect and catch those things before they actually affect people is really exciting to me. When companies have a monumental task in front of them, in our case, to rebuild our compliance structures from the ground up, you really do need to go from 0 to 1. And what you need to do that looks very different from when you're going 1 to 10, right? And we're in that I would argue more than 1, but we're in that stage where we have the right foundation in place. And so we need to focus on steady state operations and continuous improvement. And so AI is going to be really crucial in helping with those improvements and ensuring that our program remains state of the art, which is what we intend for it to be.
Okay, well, thank you. We're going to leave it there. I know that we're going to continue these conversations as this important work continues. Thank you so much for your time, Bojana and Susan. Thank you for sharing your insights. And thanks everyone for joining us and listening. And we'll see you next time on Privacy Conversations.
Thanks, Erin.
Thank you so much, Erin.